Hi, this is Resnekov here from VT-1 Gym and Infinite MMA. I'm here with Greg Nelson, who you guys would know as the coach of Sherk and Brock Lesnar and a bunch of other famous fighters. So we're lucky to have him here, and we're going to ask him some questions. Before we go on, which other famous fighters, because most people know you through, of course, those two, but which other ones have you got in your camp at the moment?
Well, right now I got who's fighting in the UFC. We've got Nick Lentz, who's a 155-pounder, just beat Tyson Griffin. Have Jacob Volkman, who just fought Antonio McKee and won, and then that was a big thing because he's the guy who challenged Barack Obama, and it's all over. Yeah, it's all over. It's crazy. It's up on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. So he's a real quiet guy. So it was the best thing that could ever happen to him. So here he is.
That fight was in the preliminaries, so if you guys haven't seen it, make sure you go download it from the UFC website.
Yeah, that was funny. We've had probably 9 fighters in the UFC. I got another one that'll be fighting in Australia on the 23rd. He's a heavyweight, and his name's Chris Tuchscher. So he's just, again, big heavyweight. He's going to be fighting Mark Hunt, so he's going to have to get by the Thunder Fists.
He's the one with blonde hair?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
He's great.
Yeah, so.
Next question here. How did you hook up with Eric Paulson?
I've known Eric Paulson since high school. We grew up together. He's from Minnesota, and so he was in another high school than I did. But he was a gymnast. I was a gymnast as well, and I wrestled, did gymnastics. So we met first of all initially through that, and then he started doing martial arts where I was doing it at Rick Fay's school in Minnesota. So he came in, and that's where we formally met. In the martial arts world was at Rick Fay's school.
Which is Jeet Kune Do school?
Yeah, Jeet Kune Do and you know, Thai boxing and the whole works there, yeah.
Oh, that's cool. On that note, just for the people who are watching, not everyone's a fighter, so what role does Jeet Kune Do still play in your martial arts, in your school as well as your coaching?
Well, I think in my coaching, it plays more of a role of kind of the attitude, the absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add specifically your own. You're looking at each fighter and what they bring to the table individually and what's going to be specific and unique to their training. We have a lot of wrestlers, so our goal is how can we create this wrestler into a person who's also a striker, a submitter, and all this after they've been doing something for literally sometimes 20 years since they're little kids. And so some of the stuff is very, very much ingrained in their system. And, you know, but basically it's changing them and looking for, you know, how can they get better. And Jeet Kune Do is really about that. You know, if you think about, you know, the whole absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, you know, add specifically your own mentality to each fighter, it really helps out. The other thing also is looking outside the box all the time, not just staying within the formal and common training methods, but you know, really trying to maybe even make up something that's going to make this guy work better, be a better fighter, you know, whatever it might be. You know, just you're really thinking outside the box, and I think that's really where the JKD comes into mentality. Whereas Guru Dan's always, you know, is kind of an inspiration because it's always something new. You know, so it always keeps it fresh. You know, yeah. Always something new.
That's great answer. Well, on that note, actually, I was going to ask you how you discovered Sherk, but before you get there, I mean, he's criticized as being one-dimensional. He's actually one of the most three-dimensional fighters around. He passes guard, he can strike, he can wrestle, and play with his back. But how did you get a wrestler to pass guard? Because he's one of the best passers in MMA, but none of the other wrestlers are passing.
Well, basically, I came from a wrestling background myself. So I wrestled as a kid and then up through college. And then I started, and literally what I did, I divorced myself from wrestling for like 2 years and just did Thai boxing and Filipino Kali and JKD and started working Shudo and submission wrestling and, you know, everything like with Eric and all this other stuff. And having a guy like Sean come into the school, you know, he was such a great athlete. When he came into school, he was just purely, like you said, he was just a pure wrestler. He was tough. He was like a fighter, you know, but he was just a pure wrestler. But he was such a good athlete, and he was willing to do everything. He was a product of the classroom. He did Thai boxing classes right next to Joe Schmo, just a regular student. He would put on the gi, do jiu-jitsu. We did the Shudo classes, submission wrestling, and you know, and then we had, of course, our when we got all the best guys together and just trained. But he would literally do whatever it took. He would go right into the classroom and do what the regular students would did. And by doing that, you know, he didn't, you know, because he knew, hey, I'm just starting out in Thai boxing, so why would I go anywhere else? Let's go right in the classroom. Let's just start this out. And so he started out just like anybody else, and he really had an open mind like that. And the other thing is, he's a guy that will train really hard to accomplish his goal. You know, when he wanted to get, you know, better at doing something, be it passing the guard or working on a submission, he would drill it, and then he'd make up his own drills, and then he'd challenge people. Okay, you got to hold me in guard. I don't care what you do, but don't let me pass your guard. And, you know, he would do all sorts of stuff like that. And so it was, and plus we have a gym where we have a lot of really good jiu-jitsu guys and a lot of good submission wrestlers and other fighters. So he had always had a pool of talent to work with as well. But he was such an easy guy to work with because he'd just do what you told him to do, and then he would go beyond and do his own thing.
It sounds like once in a lifetime kind of fight.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what they were talking about before about the classroom. Actually, it was interesting. For regards to a question for you, a lot of coaches can't answer this one, so I'm interested to you can say with regards to a fighter that's been knocked out in a previous fight, say he got caught on the chin, he goes out cold. How do you go about developing or building them back up for the next fight? So I mean, they talk sometimes about how it's easy to get knocked out once you've been knocked out, which some guys seem to disprove, and it seems to happen to some guys. What's your kind of way of dealing with that as a coach?
Well, I initially tell every fighter that goes in there, hey, you could, at any moment, you could be clipped on the chin and knocked out. You could make a mistake and get submitted. You could go in there and someone just outclasses you, all right? Or whatever. So those things you have no control over. You have no control over those. However, you do have a lot of control over conditioning, all right? And so if you go in there and you're really conditioned and mentally you've pushed yourself and you've developed yourself to the highest level, you can't do anything more. And you go in there and one of those things happens to you. You get clipped, you get whatever, but you've already had some success. You've already built yourself up, maybe, and you get one of those fights that breaks you down or knocks you out. You know, you say, okay, hey, we've already talked about it. That could happen to anybody. You could have a guy who has no skill close his eyes and swing and hit you right and it knocks you out. Now, is that going to happen again? Did it happen prior to that? No, probably won't happen again. So, hey, let's just get back to the drawing board, get back on the horse. What did we do wrong, all right? And how do we go from there? Hey, let's erase what happened. It's done. It's over. You can't do anything about it. But we can now, you know, grow from that experience. Now, you know, a lot of times I'll bring it back. Hey, remember I talked about, you know, you were dropping your left hand and you kept on saying, yeah. Well, that probably drove, you see what happened? You dropped your hand, you got clipped. So what's the easiest thing we can do? Keep the hand up, go back in there and improve from it, you know? And that happened to Sean his first time right back after he won, or he lost to Matt Hughes for the title, right? And he was going, that was at 170. It was a good fight. You know, Matt won 3 rounds, Sean won 2 rounds. And then he got cut from the UFC after that fight. Yeah, and so he was like, now what am I going to do? I don't want to go down and fight in the little shows anymore, because that really, there was no WEC or all these other shows. It was either that or you're back fighting for really nothing. So he ended up going back to work for a year. And he said, man, I don't want to do this. And all of a sudden, UFC started getting bigger, and some things changed, and he had the opportunity to fight again. So he went down and fought in Georgia, got a warm-up fight. His first fight in the UFC was George St. Pierre at 170. And he got hit with an elbow, and he said it was the most painful hit he's ever taken in all of his fights. An elbow hit and split his head open, and man, he even, you know, yelled out. I mean, I'd never heard that. I was like, oh my gosh. And he was like, wow, that was unbelievable. And yeah, it kind of crushed him a little bit. He was like, can't believe that happened. But right after that, you know, we just said, hey, let's get back to the gym. Let's go back. Let's start figuring out how can we deal with this. And he just jumped right on the horse and just started getting back at it. Then luckily, that's when they said, hey, we got a 155-pound weight class now. And then he got back down to where he probably should have been fighting all along, but there just wasn't an opportunity, you know? So it's a, you know, thing is that if you already kind of discuss it ahead of time, that this is something that could happen, And in a lot of cases, there's such a high potential for it to happen. You almost prepare yourself for the eventuality that if it does happen, hey, it's part of fighting. I mean, right now, get to the 20 fight mark. Are there any fighters at the highest level with 20 undefeated fights? No, there isn't. So it's something that might happen. And a lot of these guys came from wrestling backgrounds. So they've won and they've lost. They've won really big matches and lost right at the very end and still had to wrestle back and win to place third in a tournament or fifth in a tournament. And so they have a mentality of if you get beat, you fight back hard to place in the next highest level you possibly can. If you get beat again, you fight hard to keep going to the next highest level. So they have the mentality that, hey, if it happens, you just get up and go again.
That's a fantastic answer. Let's ask you a lot of questions because I have not heard an answer, and I know people in Australia always talk about it, and I don't know if you're at liberty to answer this one, but do you have an explanation for Brock's tattoo on his chest that looks remotely like a phallic symbol?
Yeah, well, I believe, he said that when he was in the WWE, it always felt like there was a knife at his throat. He never felt in control.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing. He just said, so I'll never forget that feeling, that knife at my throat. I don't want to ever have that feeling again.
Yeah, but it
looks kind of crazy to me.
It looks crazy.
And people kind of in our camp, and when some of the guys would go up and say, hey, what was your thought? He just goes, put a tattoo on my chest, knock it off. What are you going to do? Okay, it's good enough. Yeah. But no, he's kind of funny with it, but he just says, it's a tattoo.
Oh man. I mean, what's it like training with him? I mean, do you hold pads for him yourself, or is it too big for you to hold pads for him?
Well, in the last 2 fights, I hadn't worked with him. I didn't work with him, Carwin. I didn't work for him with Cain Velasquez. But when I was working with him, yeah, I hold focus mitts for him. You're holding them up here. You're letting them go. I would hold stomach pads so he could knee, do all that stuff. You just let physics take care of itself. You get hit, you just got to go. You're not going to try to fight the car that hit you. You just got to go with it. And so he does. He has really heavy hands, and so you just know it's coming. And I think from holding pads for so many years and against so many different fighters, you get kind of used to how much pressure to use and how to save your own shoulders and literally with all the fighters and different people that I've had and all the pad holding I've done over the years, and I hold pads a lot. I got right now probably 9, 10 fighters that I'm holding pads for, and sometimes I'm doing it for an hour and a half straight, one after another. I've been really fortunate. I have no elbow problems, no shoulder problems, nothing. And I attribute it to 2 things. One, to timing of knowing when to hold, and I do a lot of weaponry with the Filipino Kali, so I'm always almost like a Tai Chi with the weapon, because you do so many things where you're pounding your joints, and if you're not doing something that's nice and relaxed and kind of stretching them back out, pretty soon something's going to give.
So you use it sort of recovery, so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Another question we'll get through soon because we're running out of time, but I mean, one of the things I noticed, I first came aware of you when you were teaching Muay Thai on a show. Your student went over to Thailand, right? So your background's in obviously Jeet Kune Do, and you've got a strong Thai boxing background, but your fighters seem to be hand-based fighters rather than kind of traditional Muay Thai. How did you, when did you start making those adjustments so that was it an individual thing for each fighter, or was that
I think it's definitely individual, because a lot of wrestlers, for the most part, are very kind of heavy-footed, because it's all about, you hit somebody and you don't want to give up that inch of ground, and so they're always constantly really solid with their footwork. So therefore, to get to those guys, especially a wrestler whose whole sole goal is to get your leg, and their mentality is, no, man, it's very hard for me to kick because I'm just giving them my leg, and so they start to shy away from it. And so maybe out of habit, when they finally get in fighting, they don't really throw a lot of kicks because they feel a little awkward on one foot. But we do train a lot of kicking, because to me personally, I think that the conditioning that you get from Thai pads and working Thai boxing is probably one of the closest things to the actual feel in a fight that there is. The burning of your lungs, your heavy legs, all those things that are attributed to Thai boxing, it's hard to imitate. And I think Thai pads and Thai boxing are one of the easiest ways to replicate that feeling of fatigue that you find in a cage. And so we do a lot of kicking and a lot of pad work and a lot of knees and a lot of elbows and a lot of straight Muay Thai. It's just a matter of them getting just that comfort zone. When Sean has thrown kicks, they've done really well. And I really try to encourage him, hey, keep chopping that leg. Like at that fight with BJ, afterwards he was like, man, my legs are killing me. He kicked him and it's just killing me. And it right there kind of reinforced it. You see, you should have kept maybe chopping his legs down. You know, and again, it's just that comfort zone of that ability to want to be able to shoot fast and get in for the takedown, but at the same time you're trying to kick. You know, they're two contradictory things almost.
That's a good answer. Does it ever make you angry to be the other Greg? You know,
oh yeah,
in terms of the MMA world?
It's funny because we've talked about that before, because Greg Jackson and myself, we see each other all the time. We've been across the cage from each other, and we kind of joke around a little bit about it because, you know, he went through a whole interview once before. We talked about myself, Greg Jackson, Mark Delagrati, and Eric, and a couple of his other guys who are always in the mix. And he said he did an interview once, and this is kind of funny, that finally, he said it was like 10 minutes into the interview, and the guy goes, well, where did you get that hat that you wear? You know, Mark Delagrati wears all the hat, and he goes, I don't wear a hat. What are you talking about? You're talking about Mark Delagrati. He goes, oh, I got the wrong person here.
Oh,
he just cracked me up. And so, you know, I've had that where he said, yeah, people have come up and, you know, start doing interviews and call him Nelson. And I've had interviews, they call me Jackson. And I go, no, it's the other way around. So, you know, it's just the other Greg, but he always sees me, he goes, hey, how's it? There's a guy with the best name in mixed martial arts. You know, Greg Jackson. And I say, oh, there it is. So I always laugh, you know, but it's funny. He's a really nice guy, and we get along really well. And actually, we sometimes even trade strategies, you know. It's like, hey, what do you do here, you know, so it's pretty cool.
That's cool. Well, thank you for the answers. Do you have anything to say to the Australian audiences?
Hey, you know, I'm really excited. The first time I'll be in Australia will be for the next UFC coming up, so I'm pretty excited. I've always wanted to come to Australia, so hoping to see a lot of people out there and getting to meet a lot of people and just seeing the country. I'm really excited about it.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.